So I'm going to talk about one specific aspect of emotional intelligence today, which is open-mindedness. So by a show of hands, how many of you are not open-minded? So you came to this talk to learn how to be open-minded, right? So how many of you are not open-minded? Oh, well, there's a few self-aware people. Okay, nice. It's generally not something we say about ourselves. We don't say, oh yeah, I don't have an open mind. No, I have a closed mind. Yeah, I'm not open to new ideas. However, we say some similar things. We value having strong opinions. I have strong opinions. I've seen this in job descriptions. We want to hire somebody who's opinionated about X, Y, Z. I'm an expert. People love saying that. Developers love saying that. I'm right. That's the common one. We often say this. We also say things like, that will never work. This code is a mess. You should be using something, something, something. You're doing it wrong. A popular one. Now these, you're not saying that you have a closed mind directly, but you're suggesting it by what you're saying, because you're not open to other ideas. You know what's right, and whatever you're criticizing is the opposite. It's not right. So this is what I would call being a rigid developer, like a rock, rigid. And we see this throughout the history of software development discussions. So tabs versus spaces, this is one that just puts people in different camps, and then they think, it's one way or the other. It has to be one or the other. Vim versus Emacs. This is what it was when I was first getting started out, but now, more modern.
It was originally VI versus Emacs.
Yes. I debated which one to put on there, but it's more common this way, so that's why I chose this one. But yeah, there's a whole other dimension there. That's another example now I can use. React versus Angular, or the hottest new one now, whatever it may be, right? And the way these discussions go or not, I like this for these reasons, and I see how you like that for those reasons, and we can both be happy and go on with our lives. No. The rigid developer speaks in absolutes. So you will see things like never use global variables. That's bad practice, whatever it is. You see things like expressing opinions as facts. React is objectively worse than Angular. Objectively worse, I underline, because that's a ridiculous phrase. If you're saying something is worse, it's subjective. You can't be objective about that. You can say something's objectively faster for whatever reason, or in certain circumstances, whatever, but to say something's objectively worse doesn't make sense. And yet, I hear it out of developers' mouths all the time. And the rigid developer prioritizes being right. So my approach is superior for these reasons. If not, it may not be phrased in that exact way, but that's essentially how it comes across. Now, the thing is, I, as a developer, and I'm sure you have probably given in to some of these ways of thinking because there are benefits to this kind of rigid thinking. One, it's efficient, or at least it feels that way. It seems inefficient to have to consider other people's points of view, to have to take that into consideration. It's much more efficient to be like, no, I'm right, this is the way, right? No room for debate. It's simple. It's all black and white. There's no gray area. That's a benefit right there. It protects our ego. If we know we're right, we don't have to spend any time feeling insecure because we know we're right. So there's no doubt about that. It makes people assume we're smart. If we come in and we have all the answers and we won't listen to anybody else's thoughts, some people will think that you're smart. Not everybody, but some people will just assume you must know what you're talking about if you're that confident about it. And it's in our comfort zone. So we're used to working on machines where in certain circumstances there is, right or wrong. It's a 1 or it's a 0. And so it's in our comfort zone of not wanting to deal with uncertainty, messy human stuff. We just want to deal with yes or no, this or that. So there are benefits. However, there's downside. So one of the downsides is that it leads to unproductive conflict. Because imagine two people who feel very rigidly trying to come together and come to an agreement, and neither one is willing to budge. And this is what happens a lot of times when developers try to discuss some of the issues I mentioned, and sometimes any issue at all, like how to approach a problem, what framework to use, what language to use. So there was a study that came out a few years ago saying that employees spend 2.8 hours a week in conflict, costing companies $359 billion a year in unresolved conflict time. So this is in the US alone. And that's a lot of money. So this affects the bottom line, this conflict where people are not making much headway. Fred Kaufman, who wrote this book called Conscious Business, says, when people use disagreement as an arena in which to prove that they are more valuable than their opponents, performance suffers. Because we're not having that, meaningful back and forth, give and take. It's more, I'm right, you're wrong. Let's be angry at each other. So the first downside, it leads to unproductive conflict. The next one, it's inaccurate. Opinions are not facts, and absolutes are rarely true. There are always exceptions, and there are always edge cases, which, we would think we would know of because we're engineers. However, it's easier to just say it's all or nothing, never do this, always do that, but it's inaccurate. And it stunts personal growth. If If you're so stubborn in your way of thinking and what you know to be right, then you're not going to be open to new ideas and new ways of improving, new ways of doing things. You're going to be like, well, that's the wrong way to do that. When really, maybe it's some fresh new idea that could help you grow. And relevant to this track, it stifles diversity and innovation, because if there's only one way to do it, and then somebody who has had a totally different background from you comes in and proposes some ideas that to you seem very weird, you're going to think this person is not a good software engineer. They have no idea what they're doing. I've never seen it done like that before. This is not how we do it here. This is not, and then you're closing down creative ideas. And it's stressful. That's the other downside. So to constantly be in conflict and to constantly be stubborn, stuck in your ways, like being rigid, it can be stressful because you can't let your guard down. You always have to be there to defend your ideas, to defend yourself. So given that there are downsides to this way of thinking, is there a better way? And I propose there is, being open-minded. So being an open-minded developer and really committing to that on a daily basis. There are benefits there too. So having an open mind will help you access creativity. It's kind of the opposite of what I was just talking about before, how instead of shutting down innovation, we're open to new and maybe strange and weird ideas. It enables smoother collaboration because everybody feels like they have a chance to share what they think without it being shut down immediately. And so it's easier to collaborate. It reduces stress. You don't have that constant bickering. And it creates psychological safety, which is, a recent study at Google found that this is one of the most important things for an effective team, is psychological safety. And so because of all of those reasons, it helps foster diversity. Because if you keep an open mind, then when new diverse ideas from people from diverse backgrounds, different experiences from you come with interesting new ideas, you're open to it. And so they'll feel more comfortable on the team because they're not afraid that they're going to say something that's weird and that you're going to make them feel like an idiot for it. Okay, so given all that, the rest of the talk I want to spend on telling you how you can do this, how you can practice open-mindedness on a daily basis as a developer. 3 ways. The first one is quiet the ego. So, again, like most of us like to think we have an open mind. We like to think that we're not egotistical, that we're not focused on our ego. But we all have an ego, and so we all have a desire to protect that ego. So what is the ego? What do I mean by it? In different contexts, it means different things. But when I'm talking about the ego, I'm talking about that sense of self-esteem, sense of self-worth, that you feel valuable, that you feel valuable as a self. So something that is often gets thrown around when people are trying to talk about egoless programming is you are not your code, right? That's supposed to mean if I criticize your code, I'm not criticizing you, so you shouldn't take it personally. So if I say that code is terrible, I'm not talking about you, so you can't be upset by that. And it's a nice sentiment, but anybody who writes code knows that, a little bit of you is in it. You do feel a connection to your code, and so it's unrealistic to just say this and think that that's enough. I think it's a good goal to work towards, but part of what comes from the ego is good. It's good that we care enough to write quality code. So how do you reconcile those things? You're not your code, it's true, but it is important to you. So there's some subtlety here. So we often, when somebody criticizes your code, you may feel threatened. So I remember some of my first code reviews, I was devastated because somebody was criticizing my code. I thought they were attacking me. I felt like I needed to go on the defense. That fight or flight system kicks in. And it happens on the brain level. So it triggers our amygdala that says, the same place that gets threatened when we're physically threatened. If we see a tiger, it activates the same part of the brain when somebody criticizes us, when it threatens our ego. So what can we do so that we don't respond as if we're being attacked? Because then we're just going to go on the defensive. Our creative brain mechanism shuts down. We do have no open mind. So part of it is just taking a breath. So if you can interrupt the automatic processes that make you want to defend yourself and maybe attack the other person, just take a breath. That's one easy way to access that. And deep breath, not just hyperventilating, but try to take a long, deep breath. Then what happens is you can move from the amygdala into the prefrontal cortex, where you can have more creative ideas. It opens up, your ability to higher level thinking, all of that. So that's the goal here, is when your ego feels threatened, which it will, just as humans, it will get threatened. You want to take a breath, slow it down enough to move to that more higher level, more creative thinking. And take the pressure off yourself is another way to quiet the ego. So forget about proving you're the smartest in the room. I mean, you may not admit that that's what you're doing, but a lot of times when we think we're just having a very rational argument, if we're getting upset, it's partly because we're feeling like people are thinking I'm an idiot, I need to prove myself. So just forget about that. Forget about proving that you're the smartest in the room. And remember, you have innate worth as a human being that is not dependent on your job, it's not dependent on the code you write, it's not dependent on winning this argument, whatever it may be. You have innate worth as a human being. And I say this because probably you don't hear it enough, because people are telling you what you need to improve and what you need to change and all that. But the truth is that you do have that innate worth. And if you feel confident in that, then you're less likely to get threatened by criticism that does come your way. And I say that getting a lot of criticism myself. I mean, I give a lot of these talks, I'm in the public eye online, and I get a lot of really negative criticism. And what I try to do is remember this, and then it doesn't get to me so much. So one thing to repeat to yourself, the outcome of this discussion does not define me. So if you find yourself trying to win in a discussion, trying to win in a debate, just remind yourself, it's okay. Whatever happens here, it's okay. And those are some ways you can quiet the ego. That's step one. Because if your ego's going, you can't do any of these other things we're going to talk about. Okay, the next step is embrace the gray. So what does that mean? Well, I mentioned that in code a lot of times, like in the realm of computing and all of that, sometimes it is a 1 or a 0. It's on or off. It's true or false. And we can establish that, and it's kind of comforting to know that we all know whether it's true or false. We all know. However, we sometimes try to apply this to the real world. Something's good or bad. But is that true? Can we somehow prove that something is good or bad, right or wrong? Now, when it comes to a numerical answer, we may be able to say this matches my expectations, or this is what I would expect this to be, but can we really evaluate whether something that you do, some choice you make in an approach to solve a computing problem, is right or wrong? I don't think you can. So I want to talk through an example. So probably most people are familiar with this idea of dry, right? Don't repeat yourself. The idea is you don't want to write a bunch of code that does the same thing, because then if you change it in one place, you're going to have to change it in a bunch of different places. So there's this principle of dry, so don't repeat yourself. You should abstract it out and put it in a method, or whatever the equivalent is, and then you can reuse it. But do you always have to do this? Can you never repeat yourself? So I want to talk through a little story here. So Sandy Metz is an author, and she does a lot of Ruby development. And she came to a company I was working at before I started my own company, and she gave us a little workshop on object-oriented programming. And she started out by telling us to write code to output the lyrics to that song, 99 Bottles of Beer on the Wall. And she didn't give us any other instructions except write some code to do this, right? And we were doing pair programming, and different groups came up with different solutions. They, you think through it, it's like 99 bottles of beer on the wall, 99 bottles of beer, you take one down, pass it around, 98 bottles of beer on the wall. So you can see how you could make it into a loop and maybe, decrement the number and all that. And then you get to the special case of at the very end, there's only one bottle. Anyway, so people were trying to think through this, and they were trying to, develop methods that would do this and all that. And, we got to the end of it, and she pointed out, and nobody came up with this, that if all you were going to do is output the lyrics of the song once ever, and you're never going to change anything, then you could just type out all the lyrics to that song, have it as data and output it, and that would be perfectly acceptable. But people were so hooked on this dry idea. No, because then we're repeating numbers and stuff. We should do it as a loop. And it's like, well, maybe if you're going to change the number, starting number or ending number or something, maybe it makes sense to make methods and all of that. But sometimes, there's other things to consider. So the idea here is not to paint with a broad brush and be like you always have to write dry code, because sometimes it doesn't make sense. So under some conditions, it does make sense to repeat yourself, because maybe you have competing priorities. Maybe you'd rather get the code done faster, or maybe some other choice will get the customer what they need in a better way. So there's competing things there. So but developers like to say it's either all or nothing, or it's like this or that, and there's more to it usually. So context matters. Imagine the various ways that people do software development, the various flavors of Agile, the various Scrum, all of these things, and teams all over the world are using these some different combination, and they're getting code done. Is it the best way? Who knows? They're producing code, they're creating value in the world. Even across your company, different teams are going to do things in different ways. And there's no value in trying to decide which is the best way. There's just not. You may decide, for given these circumstances, given these priorities, we found that this is more effective. But there's so many variables that it's hard to say this is the way everybody should do it. And that's what we're trying to get at here. Because an open mind says, I don't know what that person's situation is. I don't know what that team's situation is. Let me be open, because there are probably more things going on here than I know. So Gretchen Rubin, who writes a lot about happiness, had this quote, "The opposite of a profound truth is usually also true." And I've heard this expressed in a number of different ways, and it's a thought-provoking quote. So if you think about it, it's true. A lot of times, especially like on Twitter, like, social media in general, people want to say something as if it's an absolute, always true. And yet, usually you can make a good case for the opposite. And so that's something to keep in mind. And that's what this gray area is, that things are not always black and white. For various reasons, I saw somebody wanted a picture of that. For various reasons, there's sometimes gray area. So things aren't always black and white. Learn to embrace the gray. And it's hard because we want to know what's right. No, I want to do this the right way. What's the best practice? But there's not always an answer to that. And so part of being an open-minded developer is getting comfortable with that. Like knowing that sometimes you're just going to have to accept that there's different ways of doing things, and they may all be fine, and they may all meet requirements, and that's okay. Okay, so embrace the gray. So we've quieted our ego, we're embracing the gray. The next step is to stay curious. So, one, stay curious about other people. So sometimes, when we come to a table and have a discussion with somebody, we're bringing, our idea and what we want to stand by. But when we disagree, sometimes we think, okay, one person has to be right and the other person has to be wrong. Now, the other person may enter this conversation, this disagreement, and think, well, no, it's the other way around. I'm right and she's wrong. But what I'm trying to say here is that there is no right, there is no wrong, there are different perspectives. So what I mean by that is these two people coming together to talk are bringing different experiences, beliefs, emotions, expectations, values, concerns, and hopes. Things you take for granted, this other person doesn't. This other person brings their own set of experiences, beliefs, emotions, expectations, values, concerns, and hopes. Let's say you and a product manager are having a chat. You say, our top priority should be upgrading our web framework. This new version has functionality we really want to use. The product manager says, no, our top priority should be implementing this new feature for the users, right? And there's some form of this discussion that goes on all the time. Like, we want to do this like refactoring. Like, no, we need to do this instead, and stuff like that. Now, is one person right? Is one person wrong? I don't think there's any way to say that, because these are opinions about what we should do next. And opinions can't be right or wrong. So this is where empathy comes in. So there's a lot of different ways to explain empathy, but I think it's useful to think of it this way. Whatever weird things people say or do, it makes sense in their head, and empathy is imagining how. So what I mean by that is we're all human beings who are trying to optimize our own lives in whatever way. Maybe we're optimizing for happiness, peace of mind, money. Everybody has their own thing. So if I make a choice that seems strange to you, it might just be because I care about different things from you, and I'm trying to optimize for something else. I have a different model in my head of how the world works. It doesn't make me right and you wrong, or you right and me wrong. It just means that we're two different people going through life in a different way. So the weird stuff I'm doing may not be the same as the weird stuff you're doing, but you kind of give the benefit of the doubt that there's some reasoning there. There's something going on there. This person is not just choosing actions at random. There's some thought going on. So let go of being right. That's really what I want to emphasize here. Remember that your opinion is not fact, no matter how strongly you hold it. It does not make it objective. It does not make it fact. So be willing to consider an opposite point of view, even if it's only temporarily. Because sometimes you're going to really disagree with somebody very strongly, and you're not even going to want to let that thought enter your head that they might be right, because you know they're not right. But you need to, right? You need to open your mind enough to temporarily think, okay, in their world, why do they believe the opposite so strongly? What's going on for them? And even just taking a breath, taking that moment to take on their perspective can work wonders in terms of interaction. Ask questions. So, ask them why they believe that, but not in a, why would you say that kind of way, but more like an, oh, can you tell me more about that? Or, oh, what makes you say that? Or, ask in an open way as well. And look for common ground. So back to this example here of you and the PM. Think, what are the product manager's priorities? Why is the product manager, why do they have such a different opinion from you? And then what are our priorities as a team? This is where we find common ground, because we're working as a team. So although we may disagree about some micro things, on a macro level, we ultimately will have the same priorities as a team on that macro level. So what does the customer need? And emphasize that. Keep bringing it back to the things that you have in common. So you might ask, like, in that situation, like, what feature, like, maybe you come to a compromise because maybe the new framework you want to, or maybe the upgrade you want to do will help you implement that new feature. So when you start being curious and asking questions, you create discussion rather than just yes or no, us versus them. So in code review, you might see something like this: these lines should be in a separate method, or we should write this that way, or whatever it may be. And so I'm saying instead, use your curiosity. Say, could you explain the decision to ... Did you consider ... rather than saying that's the wrong way, or doing it wrong, or any of those things we talked about, or milder versions like we should really blah blah blah. Instead, ask, because maybe they have a good reason. Like you really don't know what's going on in their heads. So give the benefit of the doubt. So stay curious about others. Stay curious about yourself. Now, what do I mean by that? If you have strong beliefs, do a little thought on that. Where did the strong belief come from? Did I read it in a blog article from 10 years ago from, maybe somebody who's not actually a very good role model in the software world? Does it still make sense given my current priorities? And I mention this because a lot of people, are still passing around hiring advice that was written in the early 2000s by usually white men. And it a lot of times those interviewing tactics will help you hire more white men. And now we know more about bias, and there's a lot more research here. And so maybe those blog posts that people keep sharing about how to hire software engineers aren't relevant anymore because they got us to where we are now, which is not really where we want to be as a community. Be willing to change your mind. So question your own beliefs, where they came from. Be willing to change your mind. Be open to what other people are saying. And I think it's important to do this kind of reflection regularly. So I do personal retrospectives. I try to do them every week, where I think, what did I do this week, and was it in line with my goals? And if not, what do I need to change to get more in line with my goals? So that's when we stay curious about ourselves and others. So to summarize, the 3 ways to open your mind: quiet the ego, embrace the gray, not black and white, gray, and stay curious. And if you follow these on a consistent basis, and it takes practice, you can move from being a rigid developer to more of an open-minded developer. Now I want to talk about these images I used because they were intentional. So there's this book by Edward de Bono called I Am Right and You Are Wrong, and he talks about water logic and rock logic. Rock logic is where, if you think about thinking like a rock, nothing really changes you much. You just sit there like a rock. New information can come, new things can come, and you don't really change. You're the same rock, you just sit there. Whereas water, if you put it in new circumstances, like if you put it in a different container, if you add more water to it, it brings on that water. It's much more adaptable and it changes a lot. And I would say too, I told you, I don't believe in black and white thinking, so I don't think each of us is either a rock or water. I think more it's that in each situation, you can ask yourself, am I acting like a stubborn rock in this situation or an adaptable flow of water? And which one do I want to be? And, sometimes it's also worth asking, which one do I want to work with? And then that'll help you understand, do you really want to work with somebody where no matter what you say to them, no matter what you do, they just won't change their mind? They just, do you really want to work with that kind of person? And if not, then why be that person? Because do you think people want to work with you if you act like that, right? So, and I think this ties into, I like to bring it back to a larger issue because I've talked about this right, wrong thinking and, us versus them. And I think that we see it in the software development world, but also we're human beings. And, with compassionate coding, I always tie it back to humanity in general because I think that's, that helps us bring meaning to our work and helps us, on a daily basis, ask, am I contributing positively towards humanity or not? And so I mention that because I want to mention a quote that I found when I was at this meditation garden near where I live. It says, when people speak of political, social, or international problems, they often do not realize that these conditions are nothing more than the accumulated thoughts and actions of millions of individuals. And the only way to change world conditions is to change ourselves. Now, the reason I like this quote so much is you may think, okay, so let's say I am open-minded, but what does that really matter? Because, the people on my team aren't going to be open-minded, and, people in the world aren't going to be open-minded, and the person on, the other side of the country isn't going to be open-minded. But it has to start somewhere. And so us, the choices we make every day as individuals is what makes up everything else that's happening in this world. So if you can change, one person's mind, if you can change your mind and, become more open and more, compassionate, more empathetic, all of that can have a ripple effect because you interact with a bunch of people on a daily basis. Okay, so that is it. We'll have plenty of time for questions. Thank you very much.